What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The TCU Horned Frogs are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what TCU did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for TCU. My projection had them at 5-7, and then my prediction for them, I predicted this team to go 7-5, so my projection and prediction were definitely different compared to last year. Of course, the projection was definitely based off of their really disappointing year in 2023. So yeah, I had them projected to do 5-7, but 7-5 I changed my prediction, but TCU actually did better than that. This team going 8-4 last year, it doesn't really surprise me, but yeah, it was a little bit better compared to my prediction. And then, of course, they went overall 9-4 last year. So a pretty solid season for TCU. You kind of expect them to be right there around 6, 7, 8 wins, somewhere in that particular win range and everything as a consistent program in the Big 12. Let's take a look at the schedule from last year. First off, you look at who they played in the non-conference. They played Stanford, of course, that game being on the road, and then, of course, LIU, an FCS team, pretty much the only easy non-conference game they had last year. And then they also played SMU out of the ACC. So a couple of ACC teams in here from last year. They beat Stanford on the road. Of course, having to travel out west and everything, that's always kind of tough. But then they lost to SMU. So SMU was a pretty good team last year, and they went to the college football playoff. So pretty tough non-conference schedule there for TCU, and then you look at their schedule in the Big 12. We'll start with the home games. They played UCF, Houston, Texas Tech, and Arizona. Not a bad home schedule, but they lost a couple of home games last year to two really not good teams. You know, UCF and Houston were not really good last year. UCF ended up being a lot worse than I really didn't think they would be. And then obviously Houston had a first-year head coach, so we didn't really know much about them, but they ended up losing to, Houston here at home. So a couple of tough losses there at home last year for the Horned Frogs, but they beat Texas Tech and Arizona ended up not being as good as we think they were going to be either. Then you take a look at their road schedule. They play Kansas on the road, Utah, then Baylor, and then also Cincinnati. So that was their road schedule. Obviously, Kansas and Utah ended up not being as good as we thought they were going to be. And I also forgot to mention, they had a home game against Oklahoma State. And Oklahoma State ended up not being good either. And then they also played Cincinnati on the road. So this schedule ended up kind of being easy for TCU because a lot of these teams in the Big 12, they ended up not being as good as we thought they were going to be. Like the teams, Kansas, Utah, those two teams were not good. Oklahoma State was not good either. And then Arizona also was not good either. So that's the schedule from last year. Let's now take a look at 2025. This is their schedule coming up for 2025. And before we go game by game, let's take a look at who TCU plays in the non-conference for this season. So you take a look at their non-conference schedule. They will, of course, play North Carolina, the Tar Heels out of the ACC. They will play them on the road on Labor Day night, September the 1st. This is the Monday night Labor Day game. I know this is not a big non-conference game. I'm kind of looking forward to it because you got a storyline here that Bill Belichick is now taking over the Tar Heels. It should be probably a sellout crowd in this one. It's going to be a very tough game here for TCU. I think both of these teams are, as of right now, pretty even. I mean, North Carolina's been recruiting. We know that, but are they going to be really good? I mean, are they going to live up to the hype for Bill Belichick? We don't really know. But yeah, it's kind of like Deion Sanders' first year at Colorado. He had so much hype. They sold out the spring game and then also sold out his first home game. So I'm expecting this one to be a sellout crowd. And then you take a look at the other non-conference games. Abilene Christian, pretty much the only easy, non-conference opponent. And then you got SMU again, but this time they will play the Mustangs at home. So a couple of ACC teams again, but this time it's North Carolina instead of Stanford. They will play SMU again, but this time it will be at home. So that's your non-conference schedule. Let's now move on to the home schedule here for TCU. They will play Colorado, Baylor, Iowa State, and Cincinnati all at home this year. Colorado, Baylor, and Iowa State going to be really tough games here for TCU, but they get them at home. That's the good news there because Colorado and Iowa State were pretty good teams last year. Baylor was pretty solid. I could see that one being a competitive game. And then Cincinnati. TCU might be favored in that game by a less margin, but it is a home game here for the Horned Frogs. So that's your home schedule. Let's now go on to the away schedule here for TCU. They will play 5 road games in the Big 12. They'll play at Arizona State, at Kansas State, at West Virginia, at BYU, and at Houston. So just looking at this road schedule, it's pretty tough. When you got North Carolina in the non-conference, and then you got these Big 12 games on the road, it does make the schedule a little bit tougher. Arizona State, Kansas State, and West Virginia, all 3 tough places to play. BYU is going to be a pretty tough one because they were pretty good last year, and then obviously you got the revenge game against Houston, but this time it will be on the road. So a pretty tough road schedule here for TCU for 2025 in the Big 12. And let's now go back to the schedule here and go full game by game now for the Horned Frogs. Again, they'll play on Labor Day night, September the 1st, to open things up against the North Carolina Tar Heels. And again, that game will be on the road. And then they get a bye week here, actually right after that North Carolina game. And it's not really at a good time. They get a bye week before playing Albany Christian on September 13th. Then they play that other big non-conference game against SMU on September the 20th. Then they go on the road to open up Big 12 play against Arizona State on September 27th. And then it's Colorado at home on October the 4th. On the road at Kansas State on October the 11th, and then you got Baylor at home on October the 18th, then back on the road at West Virginia on October 25th, and then their second bye week comes actually at a pretty good time. I think this is a pretty good spot for a bye week here against Iowa State on November 8th, and then they'll play BYU on the road on November 15th, then on the road at Houston. So you got back-to-back road games there with BYU and Houston on November 15th and November 22nd, and then you got Cincinnati here to close things out on November 29th. So that's the official schedule here for TCU for 2025. Let's now get into their projection here for 2025 for the Horned Frogs. This is the scale I'll be using here for their projection. If it's a 1% game in the red, that's pretty much counted as an automatic loss. And then your 20% games in the orange, those are games where TCU will be about a double-digit underdog. And then your 40% games in the yellow, those are games where TCU will be a clear underdog game by about a touchdown, 6 or 7 points, somewhere in that particular range. And then your 50-50 games will stay in the white, of course, games that really could go either way. And then your 60% games in the purple, those are games where TCU will be favored by about a touchdown, 6 or 7 points. And then 80% games in the blue, they'll be favored by double digits. And then your 99% games in the green, pretty much that's your automatic win. So we'll start with the easy wins on here for TCU. And when you look at this schedule, there's only one easy win, and that's Albany Christian here on September 13th. Again, I don't like that spot there for the bye week for TCU before playing this FCS team. You rather kind of have the bye week either right before playing SMU or maybe playing on the road at Arizona State or even a home game against Colorado, because it wasn't that long ago that Colorado beat TCU at their home place, and that was when Colorado was still a member of the Pac-12. So this will definitely be obviously, a tough, spot here for a bye week, but they should be big favorites here against Albany Christian. That game is definitely at that 95 to 99% mark, and they should be favored by 20-plus points or even more. And then you look at the rest of the schedule, I don't see any games on here where I think TCU will be favored by double digits, but I got a couple of games in the purple, and those come here in the month of November. That's Houston on the road and then Cincinnati also at home. So yeah, I think TCU will be favored in both of these games by 6 or 7 points. I get it, Houston beat TCU last year. That's the reason why it's pretty much in the purple, but I know that it should be a 50-50 game, but I'm going to stick with it here and put it in the purple for right now. And then Cincinnati, I don't really know how good Cincinnati is going to be. Scott Satterfield has just not been able to get it done down there for the Bearcats, but we'll see if these two teams can, turn things around. It wouldn't really shock me if TCU probably did slip up in these two games, because the Big 12 has got so much priority in this conference, and any conference that you play in that's pretty even, you're obviously going to have some slip-ups one way or the other, and that's why the Big 12 is so hard to project and also to predict every single year. And then obviously, I don't think any games on here where I think TCU is going to be an underdog in. They could be probably an underdog against SMU, but because that game is at home, that turns into a 50-50 game. That's what the rest of these games turn out to be. They are all 50-50 games. So 9 50-50 games in total. North Carolina, SMU in the non-conference, Arizona State, Colorado, Kansas State, Baylor, West Virginia, Iowa State, and BYU. All in the Big 12. These are all games that really can go either way for TCU. Again, TCU is that physical team and that physical program in the Big 12 that really can be competitive with some of these teams in the conference. Really, there is no top contender and also dominant program in the Big 12, so TCU definitely is one of those consistent programs that can at least compete here in this conference. So, yeah, these 9 50-50 games are all pretty much even matchups. They can really go either way. So let's now get a projected record here based on this schedule for the Horned Frogs. Again, we count that one green game against Abilene Christian as a win, and then you average out these 2 purple games at 60%. Then you average out all 9 of these 50-50 games at 50%. And my best guess is they can probably win at least 3 or 4 or 5 of these 50-50 games. So 3, 4, or 5 out of the 9 50-50 games at best. But when you average all this out, the projected record for TCU comes out to 7-5. So I think that's a pretty fair projection. When you got so many 50-50 games, it's kind of hard to tell what TCU is going to do in all these games here in the 50-50 range. They will all be close games, but again, the question is, how many can they win? That's going to be the big question mark here. It's going to come down to all 9 of these 50-50 games, but I wouldn't be really surprised if they slipped up in one of those purple games either. But yeah, worst case, I think 6-6, best case 8-4. Wouldn't be surprised if TCU probably went, 9-3 to be honest, but either way, 7-5 is what the projected record is. If they go worse than that though, like 5-7 or 4-8, yeah, it might be a disappointing year, but I'd expect TCU to be right here around 6, 7, 8 wins, somewhere in that particular range, because they are just a consistent program in the Big 12. So that is my projected record here for TCU for 2025. Do you guys agree or disagree? And also give me your thoughts about TCU's schedule down in the comments below. Is it tough or not so tough? Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.